We've got Julia DeWeese and Mike Wiles. They're getting ready to present Elevating Security Standards, Intel's Integration of Common Security Advisory Framework into Tooling Processes and Future Roadmap.
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. I promise we're almost done with this conference. Okay, hi, everyone. My name is Julia DeWeese. I work for Intel on the PSIRT. I primarily focus on software vulnerabilities at Intel. I also help out Mike with some tooling and our dashboards, taking our data, making it look pretty, or trying to at least. Before Intel, I've been at Intel for about 2 years. Before Intel, I was doing threat intelligence, mostly ransomware and malware analysis, and now I'm doing the fun side of PSIRT. Mike, introduce yourself.
I'm Mike. Try that again. Hi, I'm Mike. Thank you. You'll find out shortly that I am borderline CSAF-aholic. Hopefully that you learned some things from our talk that you haven't already learned about CSAF from others. We plan to go in depth into our tooling and how we adopted CSAF, but I've been at Intel for just over 2 years. I'm kind of new to this side of the fence of security. I spent numerous years hiding from PSIRT as a developer. So it's been a fun journey, and it's all Josh's fault that I'm here. So yeah, let's kick it off.
So before you do, just wanted to say a couple of announcements. If you have questions, raise your hand whenever you want to take questions. You want to take them at the beginning or during the talk or at the end?
We'll judge our pace. We do have a lot to cover, so
all right, that's fair.
It's really that we're here for you. If it's
for me, thank you.
Not you really personally, no.
You made us be here, Josh.
I did.
Yeah.
So I did twist their arm. So if a question comes up, raise your hand. I'll bring a mic around because we do have folks that are virtual. We want them to be able to hear your question. Second thing is, if you are virtual and you have a question, post it on Discord room 8, and we'll monitor it as and relay your questions. But Julia and Mike can always pop in and answer them later on too. Thanks for doing that.
Okay, cool. All right, so finally, we're on the last day of the conference. Almost the last session, not quite. Hopefully, this will be fun. Like Mike said, I know that there's been a lot of talks about VEX, SBOM, CSAF, but we want to make this a little bit more specific to Intel. So hopefully it'll be good information for you guys. Okay, so quickly, just to go over our agenda, the goal of this talk is to share our journey of incorporating machine-readable advisories into our existing disclosure process. While developing our CSAF specification, we had many lessons learned, tool implementations that we had to make, and goal setting. And a lot of that we're still doing today. We're in flight of CSAF in some areas, but we have a lot of ways we'd like it to grow and continue to use it. We want to go over some of the language we're going to use in this presentation. A lot of us are used to words like disclosure, CVE, processes, but for some reason, every big organization needs to make acronyms for themselves. So hopefully we can explain Intel acronyms a little bit. We're going to show high level our current advisory process, the human version right now. Some things are automated, some things are still free form. So we want to go into that. And then also just give some insight on Intel's journey. We're hoping that we can help some of our PSIRT friends and other organizations of what worked really well for us, and then also maybe help you guys with what not to try, what worked, what didn't. So today's goals, our goals have always been to ensure that we're being as transparent with our stakeholders and keeping them well informed, but also making it effective for them. And I think CSAF is one of those things that we thought would be a good thing to try out. And so far it's working well. When we began this journey, we had a clear set of requirements that guided our approach. Big thing was making sure that our current process worked into CSAF. So we want to make sure our PSIRT disclosures are timely and informative, like I said before, but additionally, we want to aim towards that more automation side of things. So the approach we took to meet these requirements, we adopted a phased approach starting with a minimum viable product. So our MVP focused on creating advisories that would not disrupt our existing process. So we want to make sure that we're still providing that good information in our current advisories that go into CSAF. During this time, we worked through our process. We really adapted that lather, rinse, repeat methodology. It allowed us to continue to improve our processes based on feedback and changing needs. We're going to touch on lessons learned throughout, through generating and reviewing and publishing. That's really what we did. A big thing I like to say at Intel to my teammates is let's fail forward. I think a lot of the times you can get stuck in those loops of everybody has ideas and we're all sharing, but making that first step of just trying, you don't know what will work or what won't work until you actually try. So fail forward of let's see what works for us. So through writing our advisories, we found that we're most effective when we're doing more automation, and it helps reduce that risk of human error. And we want to keep that consistency. And we want this process to always be repeatable. So we'll get into our PSIRT process a little bit at Intel of how it works. But again, keeping that consistency there. Our review process is also kind of rigorous at Intel. It maintains our quality of reports to our customers. And then also we want our publishing process to be streamlined as well. So CSAF obviously plays a role into that. Okay, so back to those terminology. I know some of us have seen a lot of these. Up here for terminology, the big one for Intel is SA. So SA for us is our security advisory, which is our public advisory. So that's going to go out to everybody. We have a step before our SA that goes just to our OEMs and our customers. But the big one we're going to talk about today is our SA. And then we have CSAF, which is the Common Security Advisory Framework, which is the main topic for today. And then the Common Vulnerability Reporting Framework, which is the predecessor of CSAF. VEX, which hopefully we all know what that is, and then SBOM as well.
This is my turn. Okay. So the way that we kind of visualize how this all fits together is, again, focusing on our SA. We tried to see where the overlap was, and the definition of CSAF actually helped us kind of determine what we thought blended where. So you can see that our SA is in CSAF format. It can link to VEX, and it can then also reference items from our SBOM. So some terminologies there. I'm not going to really go through them, but that's really the heart of our relationship right now, is focusing on the SA in the context of CSAF.
Yeah, I think another thing to note is that this Venn diagram like figure here, all of these bubbles sometimes change, but the SA is our big one. And then we are playing a role in how all the other ones play into our security advisories. So our current public security advisory. So you can see this screenshot here. I know it might be a little tough to see, but this is what our advisory looks like on our security center. Hopefully many of you have seen this before or looked at these before. But this is what goes on, like I said, on our security center site. Each advisory has its own unique tag to it. So there'll always be Intel-SA- and then a five digits after that. It's really nice. You can just plop into Google Intel-SA and whatever, and it'll pop right up for you. Again, we want to make sure it's easy to find our advisories. We continue to refine that advisory process. We are continuing to make things more automated and limit as many human errors as possible. So our Intel advisory, we have around 12 sections that go into each advisory. Right now, 5 of those sections are automated. So based on the information that the PSIRT engineer collects from, based on what we collect from the PSIRT engineer through mitigation, the PSIRT engineer will work with the product team to gain the mitigation details that they need to put into our advisory. So for example, when we are finalizing CVSS score, once that goes into our tooling, so we have a big tool at Intel that we use for all of our tracking of vulnerabilities. So all that information, like CVSS score, will go into that tool, into the ticket. And then once we go to generate that advisory, it'll pull the string automatically, and there's no human freeform that has to be written. The 7 other sections, like I mentioned, 12 total. So the other 7 are more freehand written by the PSIRT engineer. That is consistent across all of ours, but it's open to a little bit of interpretation using that information that the product teams have given us. and into that advisory, which right now our goal is to get that to be automated. Again, we're trying to limit that human error aspect. So for example, when we're creating the CVE description, that PSIRT engineer is creating it from various information. And then another thing that we like to talk about as well, that right now is still free form and we're working to make it more automated, is product version. So ultimately right now, how our tooling works is that a product has its own table in the tool. And that's where that identifier is for each ticket. I think ultimately we'd like to move towards having each product be actually identified by their version so that we know exactly which version is impacted, instead of the PSIRT engineer needing to go to the product team and making sure that they are giving the correct version. And it's a lot of verifying continuously. But if we can tag the vulnerability to the actual product version, it'll hopefully get rid of that human error and less conversation. Okay. No.
I had the computer before this started, so that's why it's not sharing.
Cool. Thank you.
Momentum breaker, huh?
Well, now the slide won't change. So, there we go. Okay. Computers are fun. All right. Okay, so why CSAF? Again, we're trying to help our customers. We want things to be streamlined and easy for them to ingest our advisories. CSAF provides structured and machine-readable security advisories, which is a significant step forward for us from the traditional text-based advisories. So our goals with CSAF looking ahead is to leverage CSAF, but also bring in that VEX and SBOM aspect to our vulnerability disclosures. Around sometime in 2022, after the 2.0 version of CSAF came out, is when we really started this process. So I think, we're early, kind of, I guess, towards mid 2024 at this point. We're still ramping that. We've made some good progress, but this journey really started over 2 years ago for us. CSAF plays a critical role in cybersecurity as well. So by automating the dissemination of vulnerability information, the stakeholders can respond more quickly to threats and reduce that window of exploitation, which is really important to us. So another thing I wanted to mention, and Mike and I talk about this a lot, is CISA recently stated critical steps to advance the vulnerability management ecosystem as for CSAF. So Intel saw this and continues to see the advancement that CSAF provides by helping us achieve our long-term goals.
This is my turn. Okay. So where did we start? We're going to start getting a little bit deeper in the weeds, but we really had 4 aspects to look at. What was our goal? What did we want to determine as our MVP? When we looked at CSAF, there's lots of different aspects that you can take. And for us, as we kind of alluded to already, the SA was where we were focusing, and they have a nice match for that, which we'll talk about. That's the evaluation of the profiles inside of CSAF. There are 5. I'll get into them a little bit deeper, and I'm watching you, Jays. Yeah, and we'll see how accurate I am. But for us, really, it was SA. That was a natural fit. We seemed to check all the boxes when we went in. The next step we did is we figured out what components we already had and what was a nice mapping into the CSAF spec. And most importantly, what that helped us do is identify the pieces that we were missing and how could we change the way that we're collecting our data so that we can spit it out into a machine readable format as opposed to the human readable that we've been used to. Next slide. Okay, so these are the 5 profiles of CSAF. I have the 2 highlighted here that we really honed in on. You can really start your journey anywhere. CSAF base would be pretty useful because it's the common denominator, if you will, of all the other profiles. Each of these profiles will determine which attributes of the specification that you actually need to implement. So for us, CSAF and I think VEX, there's quite a bit of overlap as far as the content that's in there. And The advisory, again, was a natural fit. Vex, we still have a lot of work to do to get to be able to produce that in a common format. Next. All right, here's where I start to get excited. Okay, so in the middle of the page, what I've done is outlined the paths for CSAF. It's JSON. If I put it up on the screen, some of you might get excited, some of you might fall asleep. But we're all familiar with files and folders, so you can see this path format. And on the right-hand side of the screen is that same breakdown of our security advisory that we called out earlier in sections. And we started to do this mapping process where some things were very natural. So we have a title and CSAF had a title. We have some dates and they fall nicely into the tracking, and we had a revision history. They also fall nice into the tracking aspect. Where things start to get a little more interesting is when we have to be creative and evaluate the content that we have in our security advisory and make sure that we can put it into the essay, into the, not breaking the specification. Fortunately, there are notes inside of each of these collective components. So the first element is document. Inside of document, there is a note section, and there's different categories within there. So off the top of my head, there's summary, details, and legal, I believe. And so we have legal disclaimers, and we actually have a few legal disclaimers, so we can repeat those. And each of the notes actually have a title. So what that will help uniquely identify each of the notes section from a legal aspect. We'll have legal notices and disclaimers, external communications, whatever that matching of the title and the category will help with that machine aspect. And summary was another category. It was actually a category of the notes as well. So that fit nicely. There are three main elements of CSAF. So documents, the first one. Vulnerability is like one of the most important ones. And then product tree will help explore your inventory, or that's kind of like the link to SBOM. So next one, Julia. Okay. I heard Martin talk about the product tree yesterday, and I thought he had a really interesting take on it, that I want to say it's confusing at first until you understand it. Then it's like, oh, okay, it makes complete sense now. But effectively what we do is create these nests of product and versions, and then we ultimately marry them to be in a relationship. So give an example. So Julia has a product, her product is version 1. I have a product, my product is version 2. So in our layout of CSAF, what we want to do is identify which products are containing within our security advisory. So we'll have a definition for product name for Mike's product. We'll have a definition for Julia's product. If we have multiple reports that we're trying to condense into the same security advisory, we'll collapse those down in such a way that it's not repetitive. We don't need to list Julia's product more than once, right? We want to remove that redundancy. Product version, we'll have an entry for version 1. We'll have a version entry for version 2. Then we marry them together in the relationship where it says Julia is version 1, Mike is version 2, and those will ultimately coincide to our affected products and recommendations. So before I go on, I did want to interact a little bit with the audience. And can I ask everybody just to stand up for a second? Maybe a little longer in a second, but okay. So I'd like to have you take a seat if you meet any of the following criteria. Is your company currently ingesting CSAF? All right. Yeah, we got a couple. Sit down if you meet that criteria. Okay. Sit down if your company is currently producing CSAF, or maybe thinking about producing CSAF. Sit down if you want your company to consume CSAF, or you want your company to produce CSAF. And if you're still standing after that, oh. All right. Yeah. All right. So without logistical thing real quick. Yeah. Thanks. All right. So you guys all earn that $1. We'll divvy it up at the end on your way out. If anybody's got change, because the bet was, can I get everybody to stand up? Okay. So continuing on after product tree, we lead into really the meat of the whole advisory, and that's the vulnerability. So you can see a lot more blues where we identified areas that we want to participate in on both the definition and the vulnerability, the advisory itself. So some particular ones to call out. We mentioned in that product tree that you have that relationship of a product and a product version. Those are going to be filled out in the areas for things like product status. Which of the products in your advisory are impacted, which ones are not impacted, which ones are you not going to fix, which ones are fixed. So all that gets called out, taking our vulnerability details and exploding things like the references, who turned in that report, who we're giving credit to, which of the CVSS components are we filling out. Today we fill out version 3.1. We have for version 4.0, I think we started publishing in February. So we're going to actually co-publish both of those for quite a while until we get that adoption where nobody's interested in 3 anymore. And we'll just by the time we're ready to enable 4, there'll be 4.1 or something. So just in time we're used to it, something will change. And for the title in particular, we take our CVE description and shove it in there. So that's a nice place for that to reside. Next slide. You want to take this?
Yeah, back to me. Okay, so really quickly, you can see here, this is our advisory process as it stands right now. So we have it separated out with our SA and then the CSAF version of it. It's very similar, but there's a few things obviously different. So just to touch on our SA process right now. So when you see this PSIRT icon here, if everyone could just take a look at the 3 arrows at the top, the identify, mitigate, and disclose. So this PSIRT area right here really falls under the identify and mitigate. So what that means is we have a pretty robust bug bounty program at Intel. And so we get a lot of tickets that come through. So anytime a new ticket that comes through, whether it's through our bug bounty or internal, it's going to go into PSIRT, and PSIRT is going to work with finding that product team, identifying the product, working with the product team to score the vulnerability, and also create that mitigation plan and making sure we're hitting our dates. From there, once mitigation is complete, it'll come back into ownership of PSIRT, and that's where we generate our security advisory. So during this process, like I mentioned in a previous slide, some of it is automated already through the first icon of the PSIRT side. Other parts are going to be created in that moment. So sometimes we'll be writing the recommendations, figuring out the versions, and all of that. Then after we generate and validate, it'll go into review. So at Intel, we have quite a rigorous review process, which is good. But we start with an internal PSIRT review. So our PSIRT comms team will come in and we'll review it together, make sure we go line by line, that there's, everything is accurate. From there, it'll go to our bigger comms team and legal to make sure that everything looks good. And from there, that's when we publish. So just for awareness, that whole review process, we start that a month before we'd like to disclose. So if we're going to go out in May for public date, we like to make sure everything is good in April. Obviously, with things like Log4j or high profile cases, those things speed up much faster, but our day-to-day process it's about a month ahead of time.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to call out that I see as kind of a mistake is we don't have 2 separate PSIRT processes. They should just be one PSIRT process that branches out into generation of those.
Yeah. So
it's
a good call. Yeah. Do you want to talk about CSAF review?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to drop down to CSAF?
We can actually just skip through. Well, I think we cover it in depth.
Okay. So from here, I mentioned a lot of this in the slide before, but the data collection starts and identifying. So receiving and evaluating those reports, triage by product teams, making sure that they have all the information that they need. So through triage, PSIRT can act as that kind of man in the middle where if we're working with an internal team or through bug bounty, we'll, if the product team needs more information from whoever found it, or, maybe everything's great and it's got a positive triage, that's when PSIRT will go back to, maybe an external researcher and say, hey, positive triage, we're working on scoring, we'll be back with payout soon, and those types of things. Once it goes out of identify and into mitigate, this is where it kind of goes back into ownership of the product team. So it's really on them to create that mitigation, and PSIRT plays as a support system to them to make sure that they're hitting their timelines. If they need anything, we're there for them. And that's where we identify the affected product and versions area. So for CSAF, all of that's collected in table form right now through that PVM, our PVM tool, which is where we track all of our vulnerabilities. And then the same for remediation details, all of that's collected in table form.
Yeah, this was our biggest gap. When we were collecting affected products, we were collecting the correct content, but we were collecting it in a free form format that we couldn't use later to produce machine readable content. So we'll call out throughout the slides areas that we had to make improvements to our data collection for repeatability standpoint, at least for producing machine readable.
Yeah, and I think that's where it goes back to us being kind of half and half right now, with half automated, half free form still. Is we want to get to a point where our entire process is able to just be in that table form or be able to be ingested into CSAF without that human aspect, except for the review, of course. Okay, so again, PSIRT Engineer drafts the advisory, goes through the review process. A lot of the time, this is when we'll come back to talking with the researchers, getting acknowledgements together, and that information, reviewing it with the product team as well to make sure all that information is accurate. And this goes back to where we work with the product team to make sure that all of our affected products and versions are accurate. And it can be ingested into CSAF in the right table format.
All right, so for validation, when we validate our human readable essays, they're pretty straightforward. We go through our review process, we look for anything that's missing, any errors, anything that is out of the ordinary. Where it got more interesting is with CSAF, they provide the schema, so we can then take the validation, well, we can implement validation using that schema to ensure things like, do we have the right data types? Are we missing things that are required? Do we have the right date formats? You know, the basic things that you run against any machine producible content to make sure it's valid, but it's most importantly that it's valid for consumption more than generation. Because if you can't consume it, it's pretty much useless, honestly. Review. Yes. Okay. So I found a quote. I'm not going to call out who it is, but I thought it was kind of interesting that on their maybe their beta program, maybe not so much the production, but it's hey, we're going to produce this stuff and it's really hard to validate. So you're kind of at your own. And I thought that was an interesting thing to roll back into, to say, I think that's fair, but it's not right? We want to be able to produce, if we're producing content that's machine readable for consumption and it's wrong, there's multiple things you can say about that, but it's just not right for the end user. So for our combined review process, if you will, when we produce our essays, they go reviewed by the product teams. We have a comms team. PSIRT's all involved in all these review processes. But then we get down to CSAF, where, again, if I showed you a CSAF document, I think a large percentage of you will just be lost. It can be multiple pages of content, which is fantastic, but how do you review that? I have some ideas on that. But primarily right now, we're reviewing it for errors and making sure that the content that's in there is as accurate as it can be. We actually, we're starting some rendering processes to see what that looks like. We're going to consume our own JSON and try to reproduce our advisory, which is a hint of where we're headed. For publication, our human readable today, we go through various stages, as Julia alluded to. We have cycles where we produce our advisories. So from a public standpoint, we do this this is so hard it's the second month of every quarter. So it's it'd be easy to just say the first month of the quarter, but so February, May, August, and November is when we traditionally publish our public advisories. There are times where we have to publish out of cycle. Those are rare, but it does happen. We do have the capabilities. It's just that repetitive nature is easier to follow. And for our CSAF, though, how are we going to publish that? Do we hang it on a corresponding web page, or our approach that we're alluding to is that we're going to kind of mimic what MITRE does with their CVEs and have some containerization where it's year, month of publication, and we'll drop our content in there. So this is, you've seen this maybe now twice. This is the advisory process that we have today. And it's, if you notice, there's 2 rows. And the biggest pain point for us is the review process. So how can we extrapolate that difficulty? How can we make it easier? Next slide is leading into I think with the direction that we're going to head, where instead of generating both things parallelly, they're sourcing the same content. But when there are 2 outputs, you have 2 reviews. So instead, it seems like it's a natural transition to produce your CSAF, validate it the best you can. And obviously you want it truly validated, but you don't prevent that process because you like to see it being authored. But the output then is to generate your advisory from the CSAF. That way you're not reviewing something twice. Maybe it seems common sense, but it took us, we figured it out. And I think that's the direction that we're headed. And then ultimately we'll still produce 2 artifacts that we can publish. Oh, what is this slide? Okay, so what is, yeah, so things that we need to improve on, things that we know we need to work on is our SBOM is in the works. It's in flight. We do have some content to look at today. Not today, but in general today. So that's being improved. The simplification of the review process, again, having those 2 different paths where you're reviewing the machine readable and the human readable, that doesn't scale. Even though we don't produce a tremendous amount of advisories, it still takes a lot of time. As Julia alluded to, we're reviewing these every month for NDA. Automation, NVIDIA, I got my eyes on you guys because what you talked about was really slick, incorporating AI into the process. We have it in talks, but we don't know where's the best fit, because there's lots. You can segment that PSIRT process into many different places, and where's it best fit? Where are you going to get the most reliability from it? And then ultimately, we feel really good about where our CSAF is today with the context of a security advisory. The next step is VEX, which is already in the works slightly. So and look forward to that soon. All right, I think this is our last slide. Okay, so lessons learned, things that if you haven't started this journey, if you plan to start this journey, some things to take into consideration. When I mention inventory, it's know your tooling. What do you have? Specifically look at it as how can you improve it, thinking about generating machine readable content. We have a great tool today that generates our human readable advisories, but it has to have some adjustments, some attitude adjustments to be able to incorporate the data and the method that we need to repeatably generate that machine readable content. Human readable has always been an easy concept. Your MVP, figure out what you want to do. Look at those profiles. It's okay to not produce the full the security advisory at once, right? Because that's a lot in there. If you start out even basic using the base format and start to iterate, figure out what parts you're missing and incorporate that into your tooling so that you can lather, rinse, repeat, continue to always continuous improvement, or in some case, continuous dysfunction. And then lastly, your wish list, SBOM. You have to have your inventory of your products. If you don't have that, that's the place to start. You won't scale if you continue just to collect piecemeal from your product teams. It's that traceability back to ownership is really challenging. So I think that kind of concludes where we are. There's our contact information. If you think we can help you, the slides really don't describe the journey that we went through. It's really high level. There's some things that we you can't talk about because otherwise you wouldn't be able to leave the room. But if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'll be happy to help and we'll take some questions.
Yeah, we got a question. Just one second. We got a question in Discord. It says, does the whole program and excellent CSAF work include software and hardware disclosures? BOM are the same for hardware and software. If not the same for both, can you talk about the challenges and lessons learned?
Oh, so we have in the works a BOM product, and that will blanket across hardware, software, and affectionately, I think we should just call the firmware an F-bomb. I think that might just be kind of fun. But yeah, so we do have coverage across all of our portfolio. I think at one point I heard somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65,000 unique SKUs, unique products that we're trying to cover inside of all of our F-bomb, S-bomb, all of our bombs. Yes.
So you're talking about the CSAF, and I'm curious more if you're programmatically doing your descriptions for like your CVE descriptions and taking that information from your PSIRT tracking system and pulling it out so that you have less human error. Are you doing that work?
Yeah, so I don't know how much dirty laundry we're allowed to air, but so
You got
it's
the go
human-
ahead from the boss in the back.
So today, around CVE description in particular, we do have a recipe that is human created. It's just a matter of resources and tooling to get it to the point to where we can either, based on some criteria, the ticket or the PSIRT engineer just pulls drop downs, whatever, to get it into that format to where it's not something that we parse back into the system, if that's worse. But today it is still pretty freeform. We have attributes inside the tooling that sort of complement things like CVE description, like our impact as an attribute, or CIA can be attributes. But today the description itself is still
It's formulaic, but
Yeah.
human based. And
Yeah,
you're
it's
right.
basically like a template that we pull from the information the product team provides us and try to plug it in. But it's meant to be consistent across all products, but descriptive to the vulnerability itself.
Yeah, and it's in that formula in such a way that when we do publish publicly, we'll scrape those web pages and check for any publication errors. So we can take it and pull it back out.
So I think, as we all know, change can be scary. So I was curious if you had to change or adjust your security advisories at all so that it could match the CSAF content. And if you did, how did you communicate that to your stakeholders, like product teams, support, to let them know that the change is scary, but in the long run, it'll be worthwhile for customers?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. So ironically, our security advisories, I feel like we had some influence in the spec at some point because our essay matched, I don't know, I want to say 80, 90% of the content that we were providing today had a home somewhere in the specification. When we track back to our technical advisories, which is what we produce for our NDA customers, we have more information in there. That was actually harder because we had to find a place to shove it into CSAF. And one of the things that I'm interested in hearing opinions on, and then especially from the board itself, is we should be able to extend CSAF in the sense that we can always add to it, but we can't take away what's required. There's things that should be expected as part of the spec, but if we add things and they shouldn't fail, they shouldn't cause validation to fail because we added new stuff, in my opinion. But we can add things like our hardware has information that doesn't have a home. Hardware properties have they don't have a home inside the specification. There's no place for like CPU ID or something, like there's no specific attribute for that. So our intent is to create a product section to contain that information that will allow us to then have product details, I believe is what it's called. And it'll have things like CPU, family name, all those other attributes. But when I give it to a vendor and they drop it into one of the open source tools and it fails validation, it's pretty frustrating because they're holding that specification so tightly that they don't allow the adaption of new properties.
One thing, I can touch on your question about the product teams a little bit. So, like I mentioned before, we have a big tool that we input all of that mitigation details for product versions, all that stuff into. So as we've made changes to our big tool, we work very closely with the product teams to make sure that they can adjust and know where things are. I've said this a lot this week to a lot of people. I feel like when you're working with your product teams, there's a scale, right? You have some product teams that have that security first mindset. They know how to score their own vulnerabilities. They are really good. There's not a lot of hand holding. And then there's the lower ones that have maybe never even scored before, don't know what CVSS is or those kinds of things. So I think through all of that, there's always change for our product teams that we're coaching them through. So as we make changes, sometimes it'll look somewhat different for them, but we try to keep it pretty consistent within the tool of where all that information is held.
Yeah, our biggest change that we've made so far, other than just deploying the CSAF, was that collection of the affected products and the way that we did it, and got away from that enter your product here, just draft it in. We'll take care of that later, as opposed to a more rigid form that says, we need the official name, we need the official version, which ones are affected, what's the range of affected versions, and then what version are you fixing it in? We had a lot of that in place, but it was just kind of freeform.
And then on top of that, with still product teams will enter that data in, but we'll still have to go back to that review process before we publish to make sure it's even accurate. So it's still, that's where I track back to what I said earlier of trying to change our tool to be tracking based on the product version, because then that takes that all away. So if instead of just the product name and we track it back to the version itself, then we know that that's the right one.
Yeah, and that may actually cause our advisories to where we have a affected product list. It may now be a table, because that's easier to reflect the content that we're collecting. And it's also easier for us to validate that it's going to be in CSAF, specifically when we move to generating that CSAF first and using CSAF to generate our advisories, our human readable advisories. Make them work. I'm closer, but it's fun to watch them. I'll remember that.
So as I helped draft the CSAFs for all the CISA advisories, the ICSAs, and you bring up an interesting point of getting to the point of drafting in CSAF first, and that's also something that we've been trying to move towards as well. I was curious, what roadblocks what would you consider your biggest roadblocks when it comes to drafting in CSAF first? For us, one of the biggest ones is just a convenient tool to do so that can then put it into an HTML or a PDF or whatever format you need to share it with the people that you need to before disclosure. I'm curious how people in industry then, as opposed to from the government side, are approaching that problem.
Yeah, thanks for your question. And I think your idea is great to produce CSAF first before you produce advisories. No, I haven't seen anything really. There's some nice visualization tools that can help you import your CSAF just so you can see what it looks like. So at the end of the day, it's just JSON. You're just parsing it. And I really think that if you parse it in such a way, it's easier for you to consume it and create the output from it. I have a renderer already. It's just not complete. That will produce the advisory that we have on our HTML today. So I'm going to take in JSON. I'm going to spit out HTML most likely, and then that HTML for some of our other consumers, we can generate in a PDF quite easily. I'll be happy to open source it. Yeah. For a small fee.
It's
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Well, we finished really early. You're welcome.
Yeah. Oh, got another one.
Uh-oh. He's not allowed to ask questions.
See what you did there?
Love the presentation. Thank you. Justin Murphy with CSAF. A couple questions. Is your validation tool in-house as well?
So we started out real simple, just using Python.
Yeah.
And we found deficiencies there. We actually have it in JavaScript because we run on the ServiceNow platform. So it's JavaScript in a database. That's all it is. So, yes, we did implement our validation in-house.
Okay, great. Quick question. I think it was on like slide 11 or 12.
Is that her?
I don't think so, but I just wanted to make sure I understood something
Number
right
12.
there. 12. The product version range, product version, that's at the level, not the same level as product family, right? It's at the level product or one level down from product name.
I think that's the correct implementation. I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'm very well at being wrong, but I think that matches what I'm used to.
Okay, the recommended structure is vendor product name, product version range, product family, optional, based on the number of products. So that's
Okay.
That's my curiosity. It doesn't make it an invalid CSAF document, but it's recommended for the standard to do that. Put the product version or product version ranges under the product name.
Okay, that very well could be I cheated. I looked at what Red Hat and Cisco were doing and I thought, oh, that looks great. I'll just do what they're doing. So it very well could be that I need to revisit that. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, sure. And then I saw you mentioned CVRF.
We're saying that literally just shift this over so it's underneath product name.
Yes.
The way it is. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
And then and then you mentioned CVRF at the, are you producing CVRF?
We are not. No, we
Okay.
just called it out for completeness. We try to
I gotcha.
be
Yeah.
complete.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't see why we couldn't. It'd be pretty straightforward, but our goal was CSAF.
And for your VEX documents, last question, I promise. And for your VEX documents, are you planning on providing those publicly in the similar way you're providing the CSAF documents in a GitHub repository? Same repository, different repository?
Great question. I don't know if it'll be in the same repository. It might be in the same, what do they call it? The same group. It'll be all be under Intel, but it may be a different repository because our VEX, at least our target for our VEX is more of a third party aspect.
Hi, I might have missed this earlier, but what's the distinction between CSAF and CVRF?
So my understanding is CVRF is the predecessor. It's an XML and CSAF is
Jeez.
where everybody needs to be. It's the latest and greatest, it's shiny.
CSAF are where the cool kids are. Okay.
All right, so I think we're done. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you picked up one or two things or just.
Thanks.
Whatever.
Thanks, everybody.